From the IBN Studios in the heart of Bourbon Country, this is a Bourbon Night Special Edition. Good evening, it's Bourbon Night. Hello, I'm Chad.
I'm Sarah.
And we already did our top 10 American whiskeys of 2021. In this episode, we're gonna get more analytical, break things down. We're gonna be talking about those ones that were just on the bubble.
The scores that we were most aligned on.
We're going to talk more about the double check and actually what that did with our scores.
We're gonna dig into our biggest discrepancies.
We're gonna talk about the ones that were included just because of how the community reacted to those bottles.
We also wanna touch on the things that were upsets and the things that we considered surprises.
We're also gonna let you know about some trends that we kind of see from last year to this year.
Or actually 2020 to
2 years ago to 1 year ago.
It's always tricky.
Yeah.
And lastly, we'll be talking about how our baseline bourbons did in this competition.
That is correct. Okay, all the news fit to print. Let's get into it with our top story. On the bubble. Don't laugh at that, I'm turning to camera B.
Okay, turn.
This just in, actually it's been in for a while, but the On the Bubble, oh boy, this is gonna be a fun episode. On the Bubble, we're talking about 11 through 15, and just how tight of a race these were, Sarah. We have some information there. So, you've heard 1 through 10, now we're gonna be talking about number 11, which was E.H. Taylor Barrel Proof.
0.375 points from number 10. That was the average score between us.
Yes, 0.375.
Barely didn't make it.
You wanna know one that was even closer?
What's that?
That would be number 12, which was Foregate, the Bluegrass Trilogy number 1, 0.125. Between it being number 12 and number 11.
So those two, I mean, really, the 10th spot could have gone to anybody.
Yeah.
It was just by a nose.
Yeah. Next up at number 13 is Old Forester 1920. Now, we had only one of those baseline bourbons that we were talking about earlier that made it into the top 10. This was our next closest at number 13 with a good old 1920. That was 0.25 points away from being number 12. Next up, we have Yellowstone Limited Edition, another squeaking by with a 0.25 away from being number 13. And then lastly, in the 15 spot is Peerless Double Oak, another 0.125 away, instead of being 15, number 14.
So all those there in that 11 through 15 lineup,
so
very close. Now Chad, in that 11 through 15, anything in there surprise you, anything?
I thought the Bluegrass Trilogy number 1 from Foregate would have been a little higher.
I did predict that as coming in my top 5, actually, of the overall count.
Right.
And it did not.
You know, we did have the Kelvin collaboration get really close to number 5 there.
So, close enough.
I would have thought maybe 1920 would have made it a little bit higher in there as one of those baselines.
I don't know.
But we'll talk about that more in the baseline section.
All right.
Sarah?
Now for our most aligned scores. The 3 bottles that we were most aligned on were William LaRue Weller, the Bardstown Bourbon Company Triple Stave, and E.H. Taylor Barrel Proof. Are you surprised by any of those? Because I'm not.
No. Right on with our scoring there.
Right. Next up, we have Larceny Barrel Proof C921. We were 0.25 apart with an average score of 93.125. So very close on that one. Then we have the Foregate Bluegrass Trilogy number 1, where we were again 0.25 apart. And finally, both of these were 0.5 apart. So a tiny discrepancy, but not really. The Four Roses Limited Edition, which I think we should talk about, and the Russell's Reserve 13 year, which is interesting.
Right.
And so again, these were our scores that we did separately, and then we averaged them. So we're talking about the discrepancies. But then as we'll talk about next, we did our double check, which is where things shifted a bit, but I do think it's interesting. I mean, I would recommend that you go back and watch the best of video. Stop now if you haven't.
Yeah.
And go watch that before you, because spoilers ahead. But yeah, you know, with the Four Roses LE coming in number 1, the fact that we had I mean, 0.5 is really not that much. But when we get to the tippity top of the best, I don't know. Is it a lot? What do you think?
Half a point apart isn't much when you're talking about 2 people independently blind scoring something, and then you compare results and you're like, oh yeah, we're just like 0.5 away from having the same score. You know, you see that more with the higher scored ones than you do the lower scored ones, for sure. I'm not super surprised by that.
No, not surprised? Okay. Well, I think we should talk about our double check.
So as you know, as you've watched the top 10 video already, that we blind scored these separately. But this was over a month's time. So we got our top 10, poured them into, basically we poured all that was left in that sample bottle into 10 separate glasses. And then we just went and took a little sip. The ones that were really exceptional, we went ahead and advanced. The ones that were good, but just not quite there.
Not on the same level.
We pulled back. We noticed we had pushed 5 forward, so we had basically split it in half right there. Take a break, come back, just deal with those 5. So now we're tasting things side by side, sort of comparing them, although the blind scoring was more to not have that aspect in there. We did need to double check these in a way. It was basically like a 5 whiskey flight fight at that point.
Yes.
To where we had our 1, 2, and 3 that were kind of fighting. We agreed on what was the best, and our scoring order actually changed. Now, here's a revelation. By the scoring, our number 1 was not number 1.
Ooh.
There was a change up.
But again, as you said, I think it's important that we do this because some days we're feeling a little more generous with our points.
Yeah.
Some days we're feeling very curmudgeon-y with our points.
Right.
You know, it's harder for certain
true.
things. And so we use that to get our top 10 narrowed down, to take the bias out. But then once we get there, as you said, we want to do that comparison back and forth.
I would say, Sarah, if we had the time, if we had the resources, the best thing that we could do...
Score it 2 times.
I would say 10 times.
If we could. If we had enough.
But some things we only get media samples of, like the William LaRue Weller, you know, things from the BTAC line. Other things we just got samples sent in from friends or patrons because we weren't able to find a bottle. So there's no way that we could blind score everything 10 times and then average it. But I think that would be the best way.
Yes, if we could be more scientific, we would.
Sure.
We would love to.
We love being scientific. So barring that is our double check. And what it did was it made number 3 become number 1. Number 2 stayed where it was. And what was number 1 became number 3.
Ooh.
Now again, if we had scored them and scored them and scored them over all these different days,
who knows?
we may have had the same results. It may have stayed the same. But originally,
tell us.
Stag Junior, batch 16 was the winner. And it was the winner based on scoring points. That was our highest scored one. That one averaged 95.75. On our average scores there.
Which is pretty good.
Yeah.
It's a solid A.
That night when we were tasting them before, and neither of us thought, oh, this tastes like the Four Roses. Like it was so far removed from our brain at that point.
And at that point, it's like I don't even care what it is. I just want to pick what's best.
Right.
And so yeah, we agreed, and we put that Four Roses limited edition in the first place, and we pretty solidly agreed on that, like up front. And then I think we felt very confident about what was number 2, which was the William LaRue Weller. You know, those two, there was a little back and forth, but I think once we were in the tasting, we really felt that, you know, that was the right order.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think those 3 were really, I mean, those rose to the top when we were doing that tasting.
So there you go, letting it all out there as transparent as we can.
But what you're saying is our top 3 remained the same.
They did.
Just some order shuffled a little bit.
Yes, an order shuffled, but
based on taste.
Top 3 remain the same.
I think that's important.
Well, before we continue on with all the news fit to print, we want to take a pause and tell you about our home on the internet. It's whiskyambitions.com. It's where you can get things like hats, t-shirts, Glencairns, oh yes, you have one on, rocks, glasses, copitas, sweatshirts, hoodies, pins, candles, and more always coming soon. That's whiskyambitions.com. You
can become a patron at patreon.com/itsbourbonnight and join our community for as little as $1 a month. That's where we do exclusive access to our barrel picks, after the episode exclusives, and more.
There you go. All right, let's continue on with our analytics. Now, Sarah, let's talk about the biggest discrepancies that we had in our scoring.
So one of our biggest discrepancies was the Parker's Heritage Heavy Char Wheat. Chad, you gave it an 84. I gave it a 91. So our average score was 87.5, which put it in 17th place. Yeah. But that's 7 points apart. I mean, a 91 is a good score.
Yeah.
So there's a little disagreeing there. We also disagreed by 7 points on the Blood Oath Pact 7. Now, Chad gave that an 80, and I gave that an 87.
So what I'm
sensing a trend.
What I'm seeing, Sarah, is if I'm not completely in love with it, I may be a little bit harder on it, or at least I was this year, or even for a stretch of ranking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's possible.
But that wasn't the biggest.
That was not the biggest. So that one, again, put Blood Oath in at the 24th place in the lineup, and the biggest discrepancy was Rabbit Hole Race King. I'm not surprised by this. So Chad, you gave it a 65. I gave it a 77. The average score was 71. That put it in last place. I'm not surprised by this, Chad, because we kind of predicted that this would happen. That was the most unique finish and the most unique treatment, I think, of a whiskey in this entire lineup.
Right.
And it had very strong like coffee, espresso, chocolate flavors. We identified from the beginning that it was going to stand out. So it was either going to go to the top or the bottom and have what we kind of call, which is actually funny here, the Four Roses effect.
Right.
And that it has its own unique taste profile, and that either causes it to be an outlier, whether that's on the first place side or last place side,
right.
We don't know. In this case, the Four Roses effect put it Four Roses in the first place slot and this one in the last place slot. But that's how we term this phenomenon.
So it wasn't, I guess, a huge shock to me. I never would have guessed that it would have been last of our 31, because I do enjoy it, and I did enjoy it. I can go back and watch our uncorking of that bottle and still stand behind everything that I said. I do enjoy it. Now, I think I prepared myself for the uniqueness of those flavors, again, not being a coffee flavor person. So when I know that is getting ready to be in the glass, I sort of condition myself differently. When it's blind out of 31, I pick it up and I taste it, I'm like, this is does not compute, not normal flavors, Chad.
Yeah.
That's when I became hard on it.
Yeah.
But like if there was any type of preface to it, like, hey, this is using different malts, or it's not really finished.
If it had some context.
If it had some context, but we didn't want to have any context in this. That was the whole point. So
I think you do see a bit of the same thing with me, though. I did give it a 77, and I think that it fell into that scoring range because I picked that glass up not knowing what's in it, and my mind swirling. Is it a William LaRue Weller? Is it the Stag Junior? Is it the Four Roses Limited Edition?
Right.
And then you get something that's so different from what you might be imagining that it kind of throws you off a little bit. So, yeah, I think that one did suffer from, the blind inclusion, but we still like it.
Okay, Sarah, now let's move to a couple of whiskeys that were included because of you all. The community. You might be wondering how these shook out. One you already know about because it is the Russell's Reserve 13-year barrel proof. As we said in the episode, this bottle had several touches that you can actually go back and watch and sort of watch the evolution of this opening up and sort of us changing our minds about it. But it did place number 7th overall, and our scores were pretty close. We were 0.5 away on that one. Now, the other one that was included was the Remus Repeal Reserve number 5. Now, this was blind, and, no apologies, but our average score on this one was 78.75, which put it in the number 28 spot. Now, it is a good whiskey. This was it competing against the best of the best. It was a whiskey that we would not have included had it not been for the community saying, hey, we really love this. It worked out in the advantage of the Russell's Reserve. It did not work out in the advantage of the Remus Repeal. Not to say that it's a bad whiskey at all. But
none of these were, let's just get that straight. Whatever came in last doesn't mean it was bad.
The Race King, for instance, is still one of the most unique things that we tasted in 2021. The Remus is a good 100 proofer, just blind. It just didn't show up very well for us. Thought you would want to know where that ended up, though.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think we should also talk about some upsets and some surprises.
Okay.
The first upset I think we have to talk about is that no Beam products made it in this year.
What?
And up until this point, we have always had Beam products in this lineup.
Yeah.
Booker's did not make the cut this year. It has made the cut, I think, every single year that we have done this so far. So that was a bit of an upset. Little Book also was not included, and we have had that in past years. And no Knob Creek was included other than our 9-year-old Baseline pour.
Right. Now, Sarah, compare this to last year. It was actually a very Jim Beam heavy year.
It was a Jim Beam heavy year.
We were looking at the Little Book coming in at number 9 of our top 10. The Knob Creek 12-year was number 6, and that 9-year Knob Creek Baseline was number 3.
Which was shocking.
Now, the bottle that we put in, the 2021, was a different single barrel bottle than the one that was put in the Baseline, so that could have had something to do with it. But yeah, 3 out of 10 spots last year were occupied by Jim Beam. 0 were actually represented in the top 10, and only 1 Beam was in the mix of 31 at all.
Which is very unusual for us. So
and that actually came in number 22.
Yeah, I know, right? Very unusual for us.
Shocking.
Something else that's a bit unusual, and that I know that you were maybe a little upset about, was no Master's Keep bottles in this year. So we did try the Wild Turkey one. We were not able to get our hands on a bottle, but it did not make it in.
Yeah, that was a decision by us. We could have put it in there because a friend lent us a bottle. But after tasting it, we just decided it wasn't worth to put it in there.
It wasn't quite on par with the others that we had already set aside, yeah. And it came in late in the game, so it did have a lot of, it had to do a lot of hard work to make it in.
Right.
We also had no William Heaven Hill this year, so no William Heaven Hill bottles were released. So sadly, we could not put it into the lineup, but in past years, it's always done very well. So that was a bit of a surprise and kind of sad for us.
Yes. Another surprise that we should talk about is something that we both predicted as potentially being in our top 5, and it didn't get anywhere near it. That was the Old Forester 117 series Warehouse K. Wow, Sarah. This one placed 25th. It had an average score of 83.
That shocked me. I really thought it was... again, it is still one of my favorite pours of the year within this group, but I was confident that it was going to come in higher than that. I was also confident that the Maker's FAE 02 was going to come in higher than it did. It came in at the 20th spot with a score of 85.
Yeah.
So those two both just hanging right around in that mid-80s area, both very solid, very delicious pours, but I really thought.
Here's my theory on that, Sarah. Old Forester being sort of a more complicated relationship with us. When we find something that we do really like, we're like, this is great. Here's something from Old Forester that we can really get behind. And we still do. But blind, that's out of the mind. And it maybe suffered a little bit. Although the 1920... did make it up there to spot number 13 at least.
Which is wild. I'd like to have those in a lineup. I really would.
Now, the FAE 02, I can't really explain because we are long past our we don't like Makers, because that turned out to only be the 90 proof version of Makers, so we don't care for. All the wood finishing series we have loved. So I really have no explanation of why. That one didn't do well. The only thing I can think of is it was our second bottle. We went through that first bottle rather quickly, opened up a new bottle, and pretty early on poured that into the sample bottle.
Yeah.
Did that have something to do with it? I don't know.
Possibly.
So Sarah, we sort of been talking about those 5 baseline bottles that we put in this year. So let's kind of talk about where they ended up.
How did we even choose them, Chad?
Oh, well, patreon.com.
That's right.
Actually, 2020, I felt like was the year of the baseline.
It really was.
This year, not.
It's true. So we mostly kept the same ones in 2021 as we did in 2020. In 2020,
we only had 4.
We only had 4, and basically that 4 Roses Small Batch Select was subbed with Pikesville instead. So this year we've made that switch out based on Patreon's feedback. And in 2020, the 1792 Full Proof was included as an entrant. I'm not sure. This year we made it a baseline. Right. There's no annual release. Exactly.
Yeah. So if you look at 2020, Pikesville came in number 10.
Rare Breed at number 8, which, it's delicious. So.
Yeah, true. And then the Knob Creek Single Barrel 9-year at number 3.
They really showed up.
Yeah, they really showed up. Now, comparing to 2021, the Four Roses Small Batch Select came in of the 5 last somehow. Maybe the Four Roses effect, I don't know. The Knob Creek Single Barrel 9-year at 22nd spot. The Rare Breed at number 16. And then the Old Forester 1920, 13. And of course, the 1792 Full Proof came in at that 9 spot. The only one to break the top 10. What do you think about that, Sarah? What do you make of it?
I don't know what to make of it because, as you said, I think I can explain the Four Roses with the Four Roses effect. The 1792 Full Proof makes sense to me, but the other 3, I don't know how to explain. They all fell kind of around 20-ish to the mid-teens, and is that because we have different bottles this year? Is it because
different competition?
The competition is stronger. Did we get more good quality stuff this year versus 2020? I don't really think that's true. It's really hard to say. I think I'm most shocked by the Knob Creek going, as far of a drop as it made. from number 3.
Subconsciously, we were hurt by Jim Beam not showing up this year with a Booker's that we felt was worthy of being included. The Little Book, which has made it into the top 10 before. It did last year, actually. I think it was number 9, perhaps. Maybe we just sort of had a little bit of an internal bias because these were blind, yes, but Jim Beam is such a familiar profile.
Maybe that's why. Maybe it's the only Beam that was in here. And so when we tasted it after we had tasted all the others, we were like, oh, this is different. Maybe it had its own For Roses effect moment.
Perhaps.
I don't know.
Perhaps. Not the year for the baselines.
Not the year for baselines. Well, Chad, let's close it out with some trends that we saw year over year. Since we're comparing baselines and things, let's just talk overall trends. Get analytical.
Well, I think, first up, the easiest one is William LaRue Weller shows up.
Again, second year in a row.
Year after year, it shows up in that 1 or 2 spot.
Foregate also showed up with the Kelvin collaboration being number 6 this year. Came in 2nd last year. So every time I see one of those Kelvin collabs, I'm gonna get one. I'm just gonna get one.
And lastly, a trend is we always have a great time on the episode.
Oh, that's true. Another trend.
It's a lot of work.
Another trend, Chad, is that we always say we're going to start earlier after the previous year, and then we never end up starting as early as we'd like.
Well, I blame the distilleries for not getting us these products a little bit earlier so we can really get going in the beginning of November. But, what are you going to do?
They got lots of other stuff going on.
I suppose.
Not enough time to worry about us.
Lastly, we'll just announce our bests that weren't a bourbon because the one that won, our American Whiskey #1, happened to be a bourbon. So let's just tell you what our best finished whiskey, which came in at number 5 overall, our best finished whiskey of 2021 was the Bardstown Bourbon Company Triple Stave Finish. Delicious.
Delicious. And down here at number 19, one of the only ryes, or the non-finished ryes that we had in this competition, came in Sazerac 18 year, which did surprise me because that it came in so high because of the proof. So I was glad to see it, but that was our best rye of the year.
Yeah, maybe that's another trend that we could have talked about, is there really just wasn't a lot of ryes this year. I feel like previous years, a lot of people would put out a rye as sort of their LE of the year. Like we had a Master's Keep one year that was a rye, we had a Parker's Heritage one year that was a rye. 2021, not really a year for ryes. We only had a couple that broke into our best of consideration.
Well, I hope that changes for this year.
Me too.
I do love a good rye.
Do love a good rye.
Yes, it's nice.
Huh.
Well, we're into January, and which means we get to start this process all over again.
Oh boy.
I can't wait.
I'm already thinking about the Bourbon Night Awards, categories that are all voted on by you guys. So we'll, that's our next thing to start working on. Is getting
Throw them
all
down in
those
the comments if you have any ideas.
Yeah. Just go watch those episodes, get a feel for the types of categories that we have, and then just let us know what you want to see in there.
Yep.
And you can go vote for it.
You can also tell us down in the comments, what were you the most surprised or upset about? We'd love to hear from you.
And that's where we'll leave it. Thanks so much, everyone. Hey, if you haven't subscribed to us already, you can do so. Come on, 2022. Let's start off right by clicking right up here. There's suggestions of other videos down here. We hope to see you over there in one of those. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Chad.
Okay, Happy New Year, everyone. Until next time, drink more bourbon.